She wasted few words. Maud couldn't understand it. As babies, they'd been so different she'd corrected the doctor's proclamation that they were identical. Now they'd grown so similar she couldn't always say with great authority who was who, but she suspected it was her own fault. The thought of being responsible unsteadied her hands, and the sound of her nervously working needles began to irritate Samuel. He'd been lost in his own meditations, contemplating what to fix next so that he would not have to think of his stifling job. Officially, Samuel was a government-employed economic forecaster, but when asked lately how he made his living, he lacked the passion to explain. The civil service now seemed an arena for men who woke to find their hopes burnt out. Every day, he too grew disillusioned. Even his children had become a distant noise. Samuel was the oldest 40 in the world. Yet fear of quitting his job did not unnerve him. It seemed only practical that he should fear it. What humiliated him was that he failed to quit because he dreaded his wife's wrath. Agitated, he'd begun to run through ways of asking Maud to stop knitting so loudly when the phone rang. People rarely called the house, so Samuel and Maud paused for a moment in their chairs. Finally, Maud dropped her lap full of yarn to the carpet, saying, "I'll get it, just like everything else in this house." Samuel stared at the empty armchair. From the kitchen, her voice droned on. He could pick out only the higher words, but they were enough. His chair began to rock unsummoned in what seemed like a human, futile move to pacify him. His childhood came back to him, a bitter string of incidents more felt than remembered, and the memories seemed full of such delicate meaning that he might have been experiencing his own death. When he opened his eyes, his wife stood before him, uncomfortable. "You've heard, then?" she said in a soft voice. "Uncle Jacob," he said. He stilled his chair. "It took this long for them to find our number. I guess he didn't mention he had family." The spite in her comment sounded crass, even to Maud. She went quietly back to her chair. "I'm sorry," she said. "When did he die?" "Night before last. That's what they think anyway. He was very stubborn about being left alone in that old house. A neighbor he'd been friendly with went to call on him for something and the front door was open. Just like that. They found him collapsed in a chair. Said he couldn't have been gone more than an hour before they found him. It was God's grace, too, because the neighbor had only gone to say goodbye before leaving town for a week, and no one else called on Jacob much." Samuel nodded. Jacob had been a private man. So private that he'd cut from his life the man he'd raised as his own son. Samuel looked at Maud's hands, a dark knot on her lap. "Good night," he said. Maud rose with deliberate slowness, giving him time to change his mind, to reach out to her. She stood quite uselessly in the doorway. Then after a moment, the hall lights went out and he heard her ascend the stairs. At the brief funeral held in Calgary, a mock ceremony for the body wasn't present, Samuel wore the only gift his uncle had ever sent him, an elephantine suit that sulked off his joints and seemed to be doing the grieving for him. Samuel had eschewed a church ceremony, opting instead for a secular gathering, in which his friend Haldor Bjornsson, a retired speechwriter, mumbled a few lofty cliches over the already covered grave. Samuel had put his full faith in Jacob's neighbor's judgment, choosing not to identify the body, and now he wondered if he'd done the wise thing. Maud saw his decision as an attempt to shield off more grief, but Samuel himself was less sure. In truth, he was a man incapable of coping with sadness. Since the day Jacob had abandoned him for Aster, Samuel had unconsciously struggled to become more like his uncle. He thought often of Jacob's face, which despite a life of labor, or perhaps because of it, had the craggy, aristocratic look of a philosopher's. Jacob's speech had even sounded philosophical, praised for his practical wisdom. He'd had a hard time believing he wasn't always right. But Samuel only succeeded in imitating Jacob Tyne's stubbornness, which went no deeper than Samuel's face. He wore a look of dog's mourning with the graveness of a